Zibby Owens, who is a writer, author, and podcast host, CEO and co-founder of Zibby Books, a publishing home for fiction and memoir, and has recently launched Zcast podcast production company and network. Zibby started her award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, to share her interest in books with people like her, and has recently published her second anthology, which I have here with me and we'll talk about a little later, Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids, which features 53 powerful essays by 49 authors, including 15 New York Times bestsellers. The essays are inspired by 5 things these authors don't have time to do: sleep, see friends, get sick, write, and lose weight. Today, we talk to you, Zibby, about your passion for books, your podcast, and also your family's Jewish traditions. I want to talk a little bit about how we met in a second, and we will get into some more lighthearted conversation a little bit later, but I would be remiss if I didn't say I know we're all thinking and praying for the people of Ukraine, President Zelensky, of course, the Jewish community, which is very significant in the Ukraine. And before I get into your upbringing, and did you always know you wanted to be a publisher or an author and a mom, and some other great questions, I want to talk about actually something you wrote yesterday, which I read. The title of the piece that was published is War and Words: Why Authors Should Keep Posting About Their Books, Especially Now. Because I read it and I thought, wow, there's so much similar about books and music. You refer to the transcendent power of books. I read into that, this cathartic power of reading. Would you speak a little bit to why you wrote that piece yesterday and, how you view literature in general in that lens?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on today. I wrote that piece because I kept noticing across social media and felt myself, how can I post? How can I post about these 2 books I have coming out? How can I post about anything, like the meal my husband cooked that I put a funny song to, like when all this horrible stuff is going on? And of course, I've been obsessed with the news and, like everybody, watching the news and reading and everywhere. I'm just horrified. We're all just gutted, and but yet life goes on. So I wanted to write something not to absolve authors, but to say, look, I'm on Instagram as a consumer of content, in addition to a producer of content. I go to my sites for the news and for updates on what's going on in the world. But then I look to the other people's posts and things because I need to not think about that sometimes. So my point in the essay was to say, you know what? Books are what let people, at least for me, and this is how I feel, and I know many people agree with me, but that's how I distract myself from the bad news. That's how I get through the bad times. Books have been, sort of the vines I swing through the forest, right? They get me through everything. And I feel like novelists and memoirists, when they think about, is it bad to post about my books during this horrible time? I think no, because every time I see a book in an Instagram feed or in a post, or I get a little backstory tidbit about an author, it takes me back into that book and to that place and allows me to sort of regenerate my downtrodden cells from all the horrible news and allows me to think more critically about that when I go back to it. And so I think the power of books is second to none. I have devoted my whole life to books. I love how they transport and make you think and feel. And so my advice was to other authors and to any content producers who are essentially entertainers to keep producing content, to entertain, to enlighten, distract, make people think and feel, and that all of that is highly relevant no matter what the backdrop of the world is.
So speaking of that, not only do you have your own podcast, which is remarkable in of itself, but you have a podcast production company and a network. And, tell me about how you got to that place where you are willing to be bold enough to dream that big, because you have so much else on your plate, which is what a lot of the books are about. And we'll get into those in a second. And you have your own family and 4 children who are still fairly young. So how did you come to be in this moment where you're willing to embark on the publishing arm that you've created, this podcast production company? Did you think about that as a child? Did you know what you wanted to be when you were younger?
Excellent question. And actually, before I say that, what did you think about my theory about posting? Do you agree with that people should post other things? I'm just curious because I haven't actually talked to anybody
That's
about
so
it.
interesting because I'm not used to the questions coming back to me. But I'm happy to say that I actually think I felt very guilty about today before I read your article. I just felt, on one hand, we're not a political organization, and we don't often comment on public policy or political world events, not because it doesn't impact individuals affiliated with us or us ourselves. I mean, my family all came from the Ukraine. That's where my ancestors from. I still have relatives there. But we believe, our mission is to showcase the music and the art. And I felt that you gave us permission to continue doing that, which is something we really believe in, which is that what humanity needs most in these times is, I don't know necessarily a distraction, but we need to be able to draw from sources of inspiration and strength. And the arts and culture and literature included are sources of strength and inspiration. So I think from that perspective, you're totally spot on. And sadly, us not having this conversation wouldn't do more good for the situation there or anywhere else in the world. So we just have to keep producing and creating goodness and bringing that into the world and manifesting it for others. So I agree with you.
You said it a lot better than I did. That was great. I'm going to just steal that next time, but thank you. Yeah, I agree. The role of arts and culture is essential, especially in the down times.
And that's why, a lot of what you do is so humorous, but the topics that you cover, and then we'll go back into, the original question.
Yes, I can answer your question. Yes.
No, but I wrote a note to myself because I was amazed. So I read your book, Moms Don't Have Time to Read, before you and I ever met. We met this summer at an event you hosted for our mutual friend, Noah Tishby, through Polly Levine, who's one of our board members, but I'm telling everyone else. But I had read your book at the height of COVID, your first book, when I was frankly in utter despair. I had just given birth to twins. I had 3 other older children. I was going through some personal challenges. And it was like a book was speaking to me. How did the book know what I was going through? And then your second book, which is such a great title, Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids. And in the book, everyone should buy it because you talk about even how it was named, and it's a great story. But I started jotting down the subjects you cover in such an efficient, concise book: spouses snoring, IVF, Ambien, pandemic exhaustion, illness, fear, divorce, mom brain, mourning, parenting styles, never giving up, and on and on and on. So although it's dressed in a very humorous, lighthearted tone, you delve into really substantial, serious topics, especially for moms. So I guess that does get back to, our conversation of why you dreamed so big and wanted to start this production company.
I did not dream big about this production company. Everything has followed. What I always wanted to do from the time I was little was be a writer. That was my dream job. I was like in front of the mirror pretending I was like the youngest published author ever, which did not happen. That's what I always wanted, but I couldn't figure out, because there is no clear career path, like, okay, graduate college and be a writer. In fact, I wrote a lot about this in my memoir, which is coming out this summer, called Bookends, about the series of jobs I tried on my way to doing this literary life that I'm doing now. But essentially, I had been writing for a long time. I wrote essays. My first essay was published in 17 magazine that I wrote when I was 14, which, by the way, now that I have 14-year-old twins, I'm like, I can't believe I wrote that. And I compare myself to what these guys write. But anyway, it's not very nice. I'm kidding. but
Hey, I read 17 and I loved
right?
17.
Thank you.
Loved
Yes.
it.
Thank you. Yeah, I was all about sassy 17 YM, like all that stuff. That's what I was reading at the time. Someone earlier today was talking to me about how I am uh, promoting unsnobbiness with my writing and content because it's true. I'm not aspiring to be a New Yorker type author, and my everything I do is super accessible. So anyway, uh, it all started with writing. I did a bunch of freelance writing. I ghost wrote a book. I tried to write a novel and a memoir after business school, which ultimately didn't sell, but are in some shape and form in my new memoir. And I knew I loved doing all these different things, but I couldn't figure out my perfect career path. I loved psychology. I thought about working in a psychiatric facility till I worked there. I worked in marketing and branding. I worked in the internet. I did all these, brand planning and in advertising and Unilever and product management. I have an MBA. And things just kind of kept weaving along in a way that didn't totally make sense to me. And I kept looking at my resume being like, I don't even know, like what has happened to my resume? And then I had kids, so I stayed home with the kids for a while and did some writing on the side and some startups. I've always loved entrepreneurial things. I've always loved starting new ventures and being involved with startups and all of that. And what spurred this whole thing on was starting a podcast, which I did essentially to sell a book. I had an idea for a book called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, which was a collection of essays that I had been writing about parenthood, which the agents I spoke to thought was a terrible idea. So I decided to use the title for that to start a podcast at the advice of a girlfriend of mine, and to try to write this other book at the same time called 40 Love, about falling in love again at 40. I had gotten divorced and had fallen back in love, and now I've been remarried for 5 years, 6 years, something. So it started with this podcast, and I've always loved authors and reading. I'm a huge reader, always have been. When I was little, I had pen pal relationships with authors who I would like look up their address and call the publisher. And now it sounds creepy, but I've always loved to read. And I thought, well, everyone's so busy. What if I just do a podcast where I read great essays, the ones that I rip out of magazines or find everywhere in the newspaper, because I still read a lot of physical things, although they are evaporating in front of my eyes. But,
Me too. I
right?
still get magazines delivered, real magazines, and I
I
only read physical books.
I know. I love to read physical things. I read 3 newspapers every day. I'm just
Mhm.
like, shh. I don't read every article, but like I need that. There's something about my
The
brain.
tactileness of,
Yeah, I it's so much faster,
Mhm.
and even with all the news of Ukraine, it's like I can't do like one-off little links. Like I need the whole thing. I want it spread out, or I need someone to like tell me it on the news as opposed to little links. I don't know. I don't process as well with online articles. Anyway, so I started the podcast. I thought I would read parts of books I loved or articles, and then I found out that was illegal, that I couldn't just do that. So I would interview authors, and I called a friend of mine, Lee Carpenter, who I went to business school with, and who had written a beautiful novel called 11 Days, and she came right here, and I was like, I'm going to start this podcast. Will you be my first guest? And she's like, sure. And meanwhile, I knew Lee well. We went to school together. She had helped me edit this novel that never sold. It's not her fault, my fault. And yet when we did the podcast here, I got to know her in a whole new way. And I was like, I love this. This is amazing. I get to just talk to people and listen, which it doesn't seem like I love to listen now, but usually I don't really like
But
to be the
do you
talking one.
think it's because you're willing to ask questions during a podcast that when you have coffee or a dinner party with someone, they just don't come out as much? Why do you think you get into more meaty conversations that way?
Yeah. I think yeah, I'm not afraid to ask those types of
Mhm.
questions. And I don't know. I guess I could just ask them at dinner parties.
But do you think people also tend to be honest?
I think people are honest. I think I create an environment where I'm interviewing them because I really care. And I mean
Mhm.
that. Like I take a lot of time figuring out who to have on my podcast. Hours. I get all the books for each month, and I really spend a lot of time, and I then read the book. I don't have time to finish now all the books now that I'm doing like 7 episodes a week, but I read at least part of every book, and I get to know the author, I research the author, and I'm excited. I'm excited to talk to them. And I feel like they can feel that and they trust me and they should because I'm giving them a platform. Like this is all about them. I want to help them. And yeah, I mean, I'm really open. So I'll often share something, not to make it about me, but just to say like I'm willing to share and I hope you're willing to share. And um I yeah, I mean, I just interviewed Brad Meltzer, who is like a best-selling author. He's amazing. It's like my third time interviewing him, I think. And he just wrote this new book, which is coming out soon called The Lightning Rod, which is guaranteed to be a bestseller. And I read part of it. But when I started talking to him, I was like, the scene that struck me the most is this one scene where a mother is comforting her son after the father has just died, and they're in the hallway, bent over, broken and sobbing, and the mom keeps saying, I'm here, we're going to get through this. And so our podcast was all about the loss of his mom and his feelings about his mom. And next thing you know, we're talking about his mom shopping at Marshall's. So it was sort of about the book, but I think the podcast is just a way to get to know people and what makes them tick.
Do you feel that some of the bad rap that social media gets for glossing over challenging things sometimes and painting perfect pictures with perfect family photos on Instagram is avoided when you're talking one-on-one over audio to someone? That, I guess unless it's totally scripted word for word, which is usually not the case, you really get to see the real side of somebody, despite what they or someone else would want to put forth in a more sterile and perfect manner. And so I'm wondering, has anything ever come out on a podcast or an interview that has not been broadcast that you've done that has surprised you or went in a direction you didn't expect it to?
I think they always go in directions I don't expect because I don't really have a plan. I think that's part of the process. Like I view all my podcast conversations as conversations. I don't even respond necessarily with questions. I feel like some of them, I respond just like you and I would. Well, now you're kind of you're interviewing me. I guess it's not a fair comparison, but if you and I were just having a conversation, I wouldn't always have a question back. Right? It's sometimes I just say something and then I let the person pick it up. It's a dialogue. Yeah. Because who wants to just like answer rote questions? Like I don't want to bore the authors either. Right? They're doing tons of publicity. I'm just one stop of many on the tour of podcast tour, if you will. So I don't want them to have to just say the same things. I can read the answers, and I often know them beforehand. So that's not exciting to them. Like I want them to have fun. Life is short. Like I want them to have fun on my podcast and enjoy themselves. So
this I really am curious about. So you have a children's book coming out, your memoirs coming out in a few months. Where do you write? How do you have time to write with your other projects and your family and your children?
Well, like this weekend, for instance, for that essay that you mentioned, I really did not have time to do that. I should not have written, but I get in these moments where I'm like, I have to stop whatever I'm doing and write this article. Like I knew I needed to write it. I knew that everybody was asking the same question. Should I post? Should I not post? What should I do? And I was like, I have a point of view. I have to write this. So I just wrote it. I was late picking my son up from a sleepover, but it was okay. And my daughter might have spent too much time on her iPad, but my other daughter had her friend over, and it just like life went on. So I basically claim the time when I need it. For the children's book, like I just wrote my second Princess Charming book, which will come out next year. The first Princess Charming comes out in April, and then we have a second one coming, but I really involve my kids in almost everything I do. So I had my editor come over for dinner and my kids were there, so we all could write it together. I had my laptop open, but it was collaborative so that they're a part of it. The memoir, as I said, parts of it I've been like rewriting since 9/11, when my best friend died on 9/11, and it changed my life in many ways. And that's part of what happens in the book. And I've been sort of writing my way through that ever since. But for that, I mostly wrote it on weekends. I'm divorced and remarried, as I said, and I wrote a lot of it on weekends that I didn't have the kids, where I could wake up really early, and my husband sleeps really late, and I get up really early. So I feel like I wrote most of that book between like 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. every other weekend. And I just find time. I bring my laptop a lot of places. I'll flip it open and start working, waiting in a doctor's office, or I'm not precious about where and when I write. I just do it wherever I can and whenever I can.
I think there's rarely a mom you'll find that multitasking and being efficient with time isn't a big part of the story of
True.
how they can function in life.
Yes.
And that juggling is what you talk about so much in your anthologies, or at least the writers of your anthologies talk about. Had you seen tell me about the impetus. I mean, I know you had mentioned you wanted to write the book, and I think a publisher said they thought it was a bad idea, but where were you in your personal life that got you to that point to want to focus specifically on reflections of various moms from their point of view on these challenging subjects, but that are often not talked about?
So I had been interviewing hundreds of authors, and I wanted to know more. Right? We had these conversations and then they would end. And I would think, well, wait, we never finished talking about this whole you're training for a marathon thing. Like, when are you doing that? How are you doing that? Whatever happened with that? So I felt like I had a lot of unfinished conversations, as most moms do all the time. I haven't finished a conversation with a friend in years. But I was because my podcasts are only half an hour, I was left with lots of questions. So the impetus was actually wanting to get more from the authors. I wanted them to write about their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And because my brand was, my podcast was Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, I was like, I'll just expand moms don't have time to this, moms don't have time to that. And my original idea was this website where it's almost like an online magazine, which I may end up going back to now full circle, but where each branch was kind of like a vertical of information, but I wanted it all written by authors who had been on my podcast. So unlike a regular magazine, it would be literary-ish, only people from the podcast. So that's really how it started, and I divided it. It just seemed like clear to me what the categories would be, because there are just so many things that moms don't have time to do, but a lot of the refrains are very common. I don't have time to eat. I don't have time to work out. I don't have time, this, that, or the other thing. So, so that's how it started. But when the pandemic hit, I didn't have time to make this big, glossy, nice new magazine website, whatever. But I had started reaching out to the authors to write for it. So I started by just releasing them on my own website, zibbyowens.com, each week. And I had a couple editors helping me who had part-time to help me get them up while I was dealing with homeschool and all the rest of this crazy stuff. And so for a couple months in the beginning of the pandemic, from I'd say April, May, June, I released 5 a week of these essays. And then I stopped because I thought, okay, well, life's going back to normal. That's what I thought in June of 2020. And so I stopped putting new essays out. But then in September, I was thinking about all the essays, and then I realized, I wonder how many of those essays I actually put out. And then I put them all copied and pasted into one Word document. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's a book. There's it was the word count made it long enough to be a book. So then I sold it as a book. And that's how that happened. It wasn't on purpose. I never meant to start an anthology. I didn't rule it out. And I had in the contract that with the authors that I could perhaps put it in an anthology, so it wasn't completely out of the question, but it seemed so easy because it was all there in the document already. What did I have to do? So I sold that, and then I was like, well, why don't I try to do one on purpose now? And that's really why I did the second one, is to cover 5 more topics, to hear from a whole new set of authors, but really just to try it start to finish to write an anthology. So then I could put that whole idea to bed. So that's what happened with the 2 of them.
I just want to remind everyone, take a little break to tell everyone you can participate in the conversation too. So please, through the chat function, ask any questions you have, and we're going to get to your question shortly. I'm curious about what might be coming for you, what other big dreams you might have. I assume that this new publishing entity is going to be a huge part of that. I've been really interested and impressed to see the names already and the identities of a lot of the authors that you've already announced as part of it. I don't know as much about publishing as you do, but from what I know, there isn't that much support given to authors, or as much as they should be, in helping promote their work, even if they already, get to the successful point that they have a publisher and it's published. So I assume, knowing what you do, that a large part of what you're doing is not just publishing the books, but also bringing light to the authors. But can you speak more to that? And then what other projects do you have going on that you can tell us about?
Sure. Yes, that was really why I wanted to do this to begin with. I never had a dream. To your original question, was this part of my dream? I never wanted to be a publisher until even recently. That was not even, I did want to own a bookstore. That's something that I've always wanted to do, which I have not done yet. But there were a lot of authors who I talked to where I would say things like, you should write about this, or you should write about that, or people I would meet and I'd think, wow, she has a great memoir in her. I would love to hear that memoir. And this kept happening over and over and over again. And at the same time, I kept hearing information from authors about the disappointment in the process of publishing, and how this happened or that happened. And I just kept hearing the same things over and over again. And then I went through the process for my anthologies and I sold these other books. So I got glimpses of my own of what some of the obstacles were and some of the strengths and weaknesses in traditional publishing. And I thought about it for a long time. I almost launched it a year before I did as an imprint under another house. And then I just kept thinking, if all this change needs to happen, maybe I can do it. Like, can I do it? I don't know. I mean, I didn't know that much about publishing. So I partnered with Lee Newman, who had started her own publishing venture. And we have an amazing consulting publisher, Anne Massetti, who had been at Viking and Anchor. And I surrounded myself by really smart people. And I just jumped in, like both feet, boom, huge splash. I'm doing this. And I am doing it. It is an author-centered model. We have 75% profit sharing. So all profits go back to the authors and the employees. And we have the author community. We just had a team meeting where we had 3 new authors on the call with us so that they could all get to know each other. All the authors meet once a week and learn from each other. We have customized marketing plans. We have book ambassadors. We're doing all these things differently to combat every issue that I saw or that was reported. And it's impossible for a traditional publisher to make all these wholesale changes. It has to be from the ground up, like building a new house. So, and that's essentially what we're doing, like from the foundation up. And it's great. It's just been amazing. I mean, it's really inspiring and exciting. And we've acquired 15 books. We're doing 1 book a month starting in January of 2023, fiction and memoir, books that tell it like it is. So I'm really excited about that, and the authors are thrilled, and I'm thrilled, and my team, we have a great team, so that's fantastic. The podcast network you asked me about earlier. So I started with Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I've tried a couple other podcasts that haven't worked so well, but I really believe in experimentation and testing and trying things and not obsessing, like just trying it and seeing if it works and quickly regrouping if it doesn't. I have this other podcast called Sex Talk with Zibby and Tracy, which was supposed to be the Moms Don't Have Time to Have Sex podcast, but then we renamed it because we didn't want to make it too mom-centered. And again, all these other people had ideas for podcasts, and I thought of all these other ideas, and I've debated doing this for a long time. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to help. I know how to launch podcasts. And now I'm earning a lot of money with ad sales from my podcast, finally. Not a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
Although I told my son in the elevator, we have this new sponsor, and I was like, you're never going to believe what they're paying me. And, it's not that much, but he was like, oh my gosh, you should go buy a house. And I was like, no. Like, I'm going to pay this one bill with this money. But anyway, but now I know enough and have enough resources that I have this network so I can sell ads against all the shows on the network. So 2 of my authors from Zibby Books are starting podcasts. Alicia Fernandez Miranda starting Quit Your Day Job, and our school librarian Julie Chavez just started Ask a Librarian, and I'm partnering with a few people who have nothing to do with the podcast and some men, and I'm excited to bring some new content that has to help people in their lives, smart, with a sense of humor.
I don't know if you would consider yourself a disruptor because you're so you have such an appreciation of, I guess, like history and legacy and tradition and what has worked, and you're bringing that with you. So I don't think in any way you're, bulldozing the past. But why I want to say disruptor is because you're definitely falling in line or even leading this evolution towards letting the creator really still have a sense of not just ownership, but control over who they are, how they're represented, and what their work is, and how it's exposed. And obviously through, Substack and a lot of other newer, independent media entities, that's coming out a lot. And, people that are friends of our organization, are doing that so well. And actually at your house, I met Katie, and she's doing that so well. And I guess, and a part of this question, I think, is that I don't believe that we're all competitors to each other. I believe we're all just potential partners or collaborators. And when the Israel Philharmonic, and especially the American Friends, approaches the idea of collaborating with another artist or organization or entity, that's the lens that we look at it at. So how do you see kind of your role in this ecosystem of this switch in mindset to really make it more creator and author and artist driven? And how do you see that we can work together more than we are? Not necessarily you and I, although I'd love that, but I just mean the royal we, because I don't think it's happening enough yet.
I totally agree. And community and connectivity is like at the heart of everything. I feel like that's like the general overlay of everything I'm doing, is how to connect people, how to connect the authors to each other, the reader to the author, the reader to the reader, the podcast listener. Like I want everybody to like, because it will make people feel less alone to be part of this whole thing. So I am always somebody who's introducing this person to that person and trying to get people together. And it's been hard in the pandemic, although I've done a lot of virtual stuff to do that. But I totally agree. I think in terms of authors and books, and yes, everybody should be in charge of their, who they are and their work, and be a huge part of it. And I actually think it's a huge missed opportunity in other publishing houses that they don't. I mean, some of our authors are like incredibly brilliant marketers, right? Who we have hired in different ways. They all have different skill sets. Would I not want to why would I not want to work on marketing with like this super smart marketing author? I don't know. It's just like all these resources.
Yeah,
So
we're leaving, people talk about leaving money on the table, but we're leaving progress on the table by not
yes,
harnessing all that we have all to offer.
I completely agree.
I have so much more I want to talk to you about, but Zach will come in and help facilitate some of the questions from everyone else, so we don't leave everyone out.
Okay.
Zach, are you there?
Hi, Zibby. Hi, Danielle.
Hi,
We have a
Zach.
couple questions from the Peanut Gallery. First, Allison asks, well, she says, you talked about how you had this non-linear career trajectory, yet always were a writer all along the way. What was the turning point for you to focus your career on writing and building a community around stories?
That's a great question. I think when I started the podcast, it seemed like there were no barriers to entry, and it was something that I could do, and I could do it autonomously, and I didn't have to get a job at a publishing company or find an editorial assistant role or something. I could just do it, and I love just doing things and trying things. So once I started doing it, I just kept getting more and more like inputs, essentially, right? I kept getting more information and more thoughts, and that's how it started generating all of these other ideas. I never stopped writing myself, but again, it's hard to sell a book. And in today's world, you have to have a platform and this, that, the other thing. So I never stopped writing. I have many unpublished things stored away. But I feel really lucky that I was in the position to just try the podcast and try doing all these things and to see what would happen. I think I viewed it as very low risk because it was essentially free. I mean, I paid almost nothing. I got a microphone. I mean, anybody can start a podcast. And so it just allowed me to somehow get into this industry, even though that's not even really exactly what I was trying to do. But now that I'm here, every day I have more ideas. I have like all this energy and excitement that has built up from so many years of not doing the stuff. And I think, personally, my kids are getting a little bit older. I'm in a new, really great marriage. And it was just like the right time. All these other things were suddenly in place so that I could do this. Yeah.
So, Zach, I want to go to you again, but I do want to ask, so with all this amazing career stuff going on,
Mm-hmm.
now I know it can be messy, that, dinner every night, the way that it maybe happened for certain families in the 50s or the 60s or 70s, where all the kids sit down and both parents, etc., does not happen for even the most successful families today. And by successful, I don't mean professionally successful, but I mean happy families. But what are the traditions or the customs, or like, what do you long for every week, those markers in the week that, with everything else in your world, even the good noise, but when do you block out all that good and bad noise and kind of just focus on the family unit? Because that's something that I'm constantly thinking about, and I'm curious what you do.
My daughter just had to present family traditions, like each family, and I just got to go to her class and present. And I talked about Shabbat, which still is where we all come together every week, like probably many people here. I do really look forward to that, to the wine and the bread and the time with the kids and all of that, and just the marking of the ending of the week on that Friday night. We don't overschedule weekends on purpose. We also don't overschedule weeks, but the kids have activities Monday, Wednesday, and some of them do interfere with dinner time, which is a bummer, but I'm still around all of dinners. But on the weekends, we're together. Like I don't make other plans anymore. I don't, I'm here, and I look forward to weekends so much that my daughter was like crying, but we had so much fun this weekend. Let's not go back. So, that's really our time. Our time is the weekends. We don't have classes. We don't do stuff like that. I selfishly want the time because I only have them every other weekend. So, yeah.
Zach, before I continue, I'll give you a moment to talk.
Sure. I think, Zibby, you might have actually hinted at your answer to the next question. But Leah asks, what are the Jewish traditions you enjoy celebrating most with your family?
I mean, all of them. Yeah, we do Shabbat on Friday nights, even if everybody's crazy and literally we just like grab a hunk of bread and light the candles and run off. Like, it doesn't have to be a full-on dinner with roast chicken and all that. We don't often do that, unfortunately. But so that's one tradition. All the holidays, Hanukkah and Passover Seder and Rosh Hashanah. I mean, all the Jewish holidays. We have a mezuzah on our door and kiss it, all the things. In the pandemic, it got a lot easier to go to Shabbat services. So a lot of Fridays we would just have the services on and just listen to the music and all of that. And one of my kids is like super into her Hebrew school experience and her community, and she's on the leadership council and this and that. And both my kids got bat mitzvah not both my older kids got bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah during COVID. And I don't know. I mean, whenever we can infuse it. I think it's been, we had a lot of loss during COVID. My husband lost his mother and grandmother, and it was really like a horrific situation. We were in charge of his mom's care while she was in the hospital for 6 weeks, and then ultimately passed away, and it was awful. And honestly, the Jewish community in our temple like really stepped up, and every Friday they would say their names in the service and send us like food and just whatever we needed. So I felt so, and even afterwards, I mean, they were so critical in providing support. And my husband actually converted to Judaism. So, my mother-in-law was Catholic, but it didn't matter. They were still praying for her. And so anyway, I have felt very supported and engaged in the community.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing what else transpires with the community that you're building, because we definitely believe in what we do, and the content that we create is also about creating a community to people that are farther and wider than would have been physically possible.
Mm-hmm.
decade ago, but even before COVID, we've started creating content that people are consuming in cities where the Israel Philharmonic has never visited, although we do an extensive amount of touring when it's normal days. We're not going to be in every city and town in the United States ever because of venue issues and logistics issues. And so for us, this wider community that we're seeing develop, which was frankly, it was coincidence. It wasn't on purpose. It was a result of the terrifying and tragic nature of the pandemic. Yet it's this outcome that now we have friends in so many places that we realize we're always there, and now we have a chance to connect with. So I'm wondering, do you plan in-person event, or do you intend for there to be any in-person events or book tours or in-person gatherings with any of your entities now that COVID hopefully is improving?
Yes. I want that. I'm doing that. I'm planning it. My children's book, Princess Charming, comes out April 19th, and I'm planning like every night events and afternoons in New York City. I'm going to Miami for Books and Books for Independent Bookstore Day. I'm going to do an event there. I'm going to do an event in LA at Pages, a bookstore in Manhattan Beach. I'm already planning events for Bookends this summer. I'm going to Seattle and LA and Rhode Island and all these places. So I'm in it.
Well, keep us posted about the dates because we'd love
Okay.
to share them with everyone.
I would love to. Thank you.
And yeah, I'm so excited for you and for everybody in your orbit, because when you can do something that also just uplifts everyone that's a part of it at the same time, it's so exciting. So I do want to just ask you if, you'll share if you've ever been to Israel, or if you plan to go with your kids at some point, or if you ever went with your family, and what that experience was like for you.
I have never been, and I can't believe it, but I haven't. I really want to go. My daughter, who I mentioned earlier, is dying to go. So it's just a matter of putting it on the calendar. And it's hard because I split my every vacation. We only get like 6 or 7 days, so I really would like a whole big chunk of time to take them. But I'm gonna make do. So at some point we are going.
Well, we'll make sure you get a VIP tour and great
Thank
concert.
you. Yes, that'd be great.
Zach, so I think we're going to wrap up if that's it. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that seems like a good time. I think audience asked all their questions.
Thank you so much, Zibby. You're such an inspiration. You also make it okay not to be perfect and to admit we don't have time for everything we want to do. And so for that, on behalf of all of parents everywhere, I'm so grateful. And I look forward to seeing you again soon at one of your events.
That would be great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.